Hi, and thank you for coming on my podcast today.
Thank you for having me.
So, before we start, I guess I'll just, give a little rundown of what the purpose of this podcast is. For my senior workshop, I have to create a artifact, so I chose podcast, and I chose to talk about a controversial topic, which is, the topic of cannabis. And I thought, with current events happening, with new laws and new policies, I thought that it would be very timely for this podcast. So, thank you again for joining me and for willing to speak about this. I know it's a little interesting.
Of course.
So my first question for you, I just want to get some history, I guess, about your experiences. So let's talk a little bit about your experiences with marijuana.
Okay. I started smoking when I came to college. In high school, it was very taboo, and I didn't see a reason to smoke. But when I came to college, a few of my friends smoked it, so I smoked with them, and I never bought my own weed, so I just smoked in groups when we would hang out. I also use it as a way to relax. Now, as a junior, I have my own weed, buy my own stuff. For track, after a long race, sometimes I smoke to loosen my muscles. I've never done it after a competitive race, but the day after I smoke, like on a practice run or something, I have the sensation of light feet, which is odd to say, but it seems much easier to run, and I focus more on what I'm doing and not much about my technique or my time.
Oh, are you okay?
I'm fine, just a little sick.
You said that you mainly smoked in college because it was taboo in high school. Why do you think that is?
What do I think it's taboo?
Yeah, or why do you think it was perceived as that way in high school?
Mm. I think because I was taught that it's bad for you and it's a gateway drug, and only certain types of people smoke weed, especially in high school, which I now know isn't true. A lot of close friends actually smoked in high school, and I just wasn't aware.
So would you say that you were more open to it because other people were more open about their feelings towards it in college, I mean?
Yeah, I think so. I was definitely um, more open to the fact that it was not as bad as I was taught. Um, and also, I figured in college I was mature enough to not abuse using
Hmm.
marijuana as a coping mechanism, and I was old enough um, to make better decisions.
So you said, this you have a sensation of light feet. I find that interesting. Would you say that even the day after you smoke, you feel it could be put in a bad way, but you feel less in tune with your body, so that could help you run more or run better?
Yeah, I guess I put it in that way. Usually when I smoke, I'm not able to feel my limbs as much, so I'm just looser, or feels like I am.
Right. So, do you advocate for the use of cannabis in training?
I do, yeah, I do advocate for the use of cannabis in training. Um, I think it has major health benefits that people aren't aware of, and I've recently, during my college career, learned about. I think there's a lot of stigma around it, and people think people who smoke are lazy or unmotivated. Like I said, in high school, I just assumed people who didn't do as well in school were the only ones using cannabis. Um, but now I know plenty of people who smoke a significant amount. They're extremely motivated and successful. Um, there are so many athletes who smoke as well, and they're competing at a significantly higher level than I am.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because I did some research on this, and there are a lot of professional athletes. There's like the Diaz brothers, Michael Phelps, like big names out there that openly campaign for the use of cannabis. So I literally in high school and in college now, I like wasn't even aware that athletes did that. I just assumed that since they are competing at such a high level, they were just stray away from drugs and alcohol.
Yeah, I think I have the same view.
Mm. So how do you incorporate cannabis into your training?
Like I said earlier on, I usually use it as a recovery tool after meets. I said matches. After meets, I'll smoke the day after and do cool down runs. Um, I also use it in the off season after a long run. It's to relax and not feel as heavy or sore.
That's good. So what do you think the advantages of cannabis are from what you know about it?
I haven't done much personal research, but I think there are extreme benefits to cannabis. Aside from medical benefits, I think it can be used to treat mental health. That being said, I think there's a fine line between the health benefits and using it as a coping mechanism. I think when it becomes a way to cope with depression or anxiety, it can do more harm than good. One of my teammates who would smoke before races said it would help them block out the crowds and other runners. So I think in that sense, it can be good.
I think what you just said is interesting because I would figure that it was a bit unorthodox because you're essentially competing while under the influence, and I feel like morally, a lot of athletes wouldn't be able to do that because that does you're not really giving it your all in a competitive setting.
Mm, that is a good way to look at it. I think for some people, they can think straight and focus more on cannabis, um, especially if they're dealing with any mental health issues. Um, but I can see why people might want to stay sober during races. It makes more sense. But if it helps people and evens out the playing field, if they can't focus or are not going to do well, then it could be good for them.
Right. I'm glad that you brought up mental health because I think that a lot of people kind of this I think goes for alcohol. When they are a little depressed or anxious, they just turn to, drugs and alcohol. And I feel like that's not the best mindset to have because then I feel like it could become a gateway drug in the sense of like, well, I'm smoking weed and it's not enough for me. And now I need to turn to, something else to feel uh, better. Yeah. So I think I'm glad you brought that up. So why do you personally consume cannabis?
In our daily lives, there's so much that we're juggling between school, work, and practice. It starts, excuse me, it starts to become overwhelming. I usually choose weed over alcohol because I'm able to do more work and be conscious of my behavior when I'm high versus when I'm drunk. Um, I don't think I smoke as often anymore because I don't have the time. But being high lets me experience life differently and through a different lens, while being drunk makes me feel out of control and not so conscious.
I was just about to read out a fact to you since you brought up, since we're on the topic of alcohol. So, did you know that marijuana was the second most commonly used substance within the student athlete population after alcohol at 77.1%. So, what are your thoughts on that?
Oh, I had no idea, but I'm honestly not too shocked by that statistic. Um, I've talked to a lot of athletes, and I know many of them, at least in the college I go to, it's popular to use marijuana, especially during recovery. Um, it might just be the location of the school, but yeah, it makes a lot of sense. You don't get hungover. There's no day after pains. You can just get up and run the next day. Whereas, like, after drinking, going out, usually it's a lot harder to even get up, let alone run a race or go to practice.
Oh, I never even thought about that. About like location, like that could affect things because I feel like in the South, you probably wouldn't like smoke weed. I mean, you probably would smoke weed, but I feel like it would be the opposite on the spectrum where alcohol would be more commonly used than marijuana or like any other drugs. But
Mhm.
I don't know, who knows. Uh, so something I talked to my friend about recently was the fact that weed. I mean, weed is becoming legal, but currently I guess in the majority of areas it's still illegal. So why do you think that weed is illegal and tobacco or cigarettes and cigars are legal?
Um, I don't know too much about this, but it's probably because of the war on drugs, I think in the 70s or 80s,
Yeah, I was just about to say that.
mhm, where basically the government made it illegal to smoke weed, probably because of like rebellions and like the hippies. Um, it also made it so that there's another way to incarcerate people of color. Um, but hopefully now that it's becoming legal, a lot of the charges will be dropped, especially for people of color who are in prisons who don't deserve to be there.
Yeah, do you think that that would happen though
What would happen?
in states where it's legalized? People who are incarcerated would be released because the law changed, or do you think they still would have to fill out their sentence?
No, I've seen a lot of social media posts
Hmm.
about how family members and just social justice organizations want to release people, especially there were black dealers in like the 90s who got life sentences for being weed dealers.
Wow.
Yeah, I saw a post recently on Instagram, but it's shocking that they're still fulfilling their sentence for something that's legal in how many states now? At least 10.
Yeah.
I don't know how many.
Hmm.
Yeah.
I never thought about that actually. I hope that that continues to happen then. Like for states that it's legal, people are released.
Yeah, I hope so. I don't know if it will happen.
Uh, so I guess we already touched on this before, but um, how do you view cannabis in general?
Um, I think cannabis has many benefits. Um, I think the stereotypes are far from the truth. Like I've said, I had or I shared a lot of the stereotypes that you may hear from people who smoke weed or about people who smoke weed. Um, I think they can be true for some, but more people smoke than you think, especially college students. And most of those people are successful. even if they don't smoke currently, um, it doesn't lead to a life of crime and drugs, as one may see in the media. The topic of medical versus recreational is a whole other issue, but I do think there are fewer consequences to consuming cannabis versus consuming alcohol.
Uh, so how often do you consume it, marijuana?
I usually smoke once a week if I do. It's not very much. I kind of see it as a reward after a long run or if I'm feeling particularly sore.
I do agree though. On going back to sorry your other question, I didn't comment on that. But I do agree that there's less consequences, consuming cannabis versus alcohol because alcohol, affects your liver, um, and cannabis affect. I mean, they both affect different organs, but I feel like being under the influence of one has more consequences than the other. Also, I feel like alcohol has more long term effects than cannabis does.
Yeah, I agree. I don't know much about cannabis studies. I do know that it depends on I watched the documentary, and if you were born with a type of gene, basically, cannabis can increase your chances for getting schizophrenia.
Really?
Yeah, it's very interesting and scary. Yeah, but usually people who develop schizophrenia um, were regular smokers. Like they smoked at least once a day, and they started when they were in their 20s. And so they developed schizophrenia like 10 years after being heavy smokers. Um, but still, I do agree that since there's a lot of different methods to consume marijuana, I think the benefits outweigh um, the benefits, if there are any, of alcohol, um, especially with edibles and oils and teas and stuff.
How does it typically affect you?
Typically, I usually just smoke. I don't take edibles. I usually feel heavy and very relaxed. And I think since I'm so relaxed, my body just kind of droops, which makes me feel even heavier. Um, I usually get the feeling in all my muscles. I usually like to sit back and watch some TV. Um, but overall, I think it's a great way to have fun and let loose and forget about stressors.
Yeah, I feel like that sounds kind of normal. The sensation that you feel when you smoke, like your body feeling relaxed, because it makes sense. Like all your other senses aren't really like heightened; they're just dulled, which is why I feel like you don't feel your body as much as you usually would if you were sober. So I think that feeling makes sense.
Yeah, thanks.
Mm. So you know, going back to the sports industry and athletics and all that, do you think that the sports industry is taking a turn because of the increasing popularity in marijuana?
Yeah, I think it definitely is. Since the NBA isn't testing anyone, I feel like that's the first step into increasing the popularity of using marijuana in all senses, recovery and as a benefit while working out.
Mm.
That makes sense.
I think the NBA probably didn't see it as a good distribution of their resources because it is legal. I mean, most of the athletes like live in California, and so that's like the first state to legalize it. It wasn't the first, but it was one of the first states to legalize it. So, like, I think other like professional leagues will probably follow in their footsteps, hopefully.
Yeah, I hope so too. Yeah, I just read that the NBA wasn't testing, but yeah, hopefully other big sports industries will make it legal and stop testing.
Yeah. I mean, I think obviously they should keep drug testing for other drugs like hard drugs, like steroids or something, but I think marijuana is a little uh less crime involved, so I don't think that it should be necessary.
Mm.
So, what do you think of the policies against the use of cannabis? Currently, it's still banned in the NCAA. The NFL is still working towards it, but it's still illegal. I'm sure in other sports it's illegal as well. So, what do you think about that?
I think the policies were reasonable, but I think things are truly changing. I personally don't see it as a performance enhancing drug. If anything, it has the opposite effects on athletes and people in general, marijuana users. Um, Anything that alters your perspective, especially marijuana, which is known to have calming and relaxing effects, makes it useless to athletes while competing.
Yeah, I agree. I think well, we talked about this before about how your teammate would smoke during runs. I think it is a bit of a performance enhancing drug because it I don't know, it's tricky. It's a tricky situation, but I feel like if you are under the influence of marijuana, you're just not in your right mind. And I feel like if like a professional athlete were to smoke before like a game or something, I feel like they wouldn't like be truly there because it and research shows that it slows your reflexes down. So I feel like if an NFL player were to smoke right before a game, who knows if their reflexes would be accurate.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's complex because if someone is self-medicating or using it in micro dosages, it could help them while competing. But for people who aren't used to smoking and usually get the effect of feeling very relaxed and not really aware of their surroundings, then they can just do damage to their competition.
Right. I feel like if you are using it medically, I feel like you would use it in, a topical form or like a pill form or something. I don't think that you would smoke it for the sensation of being high right before a game. Because
Mhm.
there is CBD as well that, you know, has, rehabilitation or people use it for rehab and because it comes in topical forms and stuff like that. So, do you think that these policies, are going to stay in place in the near future with all the new policy changes?
I mean, hopefully not. Hopefully they'll change with the times, but who knows? I hope it doesn't take too long. But yeah, as soon as all the states make it legal for people 21 and older, I think the sports industry will switch to.
So we talked a little bit about how you didn't really smoke it in high school because you kind of believed in those stereotypes. So would you say that your views, really have changed between then and now?
Absolutely. I think I'm more aware of what I put into my body, being older, um, and I want to feel as healthy and relaxed as I could, especially with the pandemic and school, and all the other stress. So cannabis is the best option for me. There are many forms of it too, so it can be tailored to your needs.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of people are uneducated about that fact. There's I don't know how many. There's probably a lot more than I'm gonna name right now, but There's topical forms, there's tinctures or whatever, like things you put on your tongue. You can inhale it, you can eat it, you can be in the vicinity of it and get a secondhand high. And I feel like a lot of people, when they hear smoking weed, they just assume that it's going to be a gateway drug and that go along with that you're just, a stoner. And I feel like, it's just the purpose of this podcast. I want to like break all these stereotypes and I want people to be aware of the benefits because so many people use it medically. Even people that like baby boomers, like they were so against it and now they're all for it because they realize that it actually has health benefits.
Hmm. Yeah, and I think what you're doing with this podcast is great, breaking the stigmas and talking about the stereotype of the lazy stoner who doesn't get anything done.
Thank you. I appreciate that a lot. So I have my last question for you here. Uh, this might be a little loaded, but if you can remember, what was one of the most difficult parts of your career where marijuana helped you?
Um, well, I have a lot of knee problems and knee pains. I tore my IT band last year, and I still have trouble with that. So marijuana has helped me a lot with knee pains and just recovery. Um, my knees are a bit weak, especially because I don't keep up with my PT exercises. So when I smoke, it helps with the pain. Uh, it's enjoyable for me mentally and physically, which is one of the reasons I advocate for it. Um, it also makes the pain bearable after a long run. Um, so I would say I use it as a rehab tool, like many other athletes.
Yeah, I also have a knee issue, and sometimes I smoke after a long like game or match or practice, and I think it does really help, and it helps more than I would think it would. Um, because a lot of people just assume that when you do smoke or ingest it in some way, it's only like in your head. But it's so much more than that. It's hard to explain. But I think like a lot more research definitely needs to be done for people to be really sold on this idea.
Yeah, I agree. I think it can be bad for me if I'm too relaxed and then I try to do PT exercises.
Right.
But for the most part, if I'm just relaxing, I can use it for the pain because a lot of times my knees will ache even when I'm not doing any physical exercises.
Mm. All right. Well, that's all I have for you today. Thank you so much for coming on my podcast with me.
Thank you for having me.
I hope you have a good rest of your day.
You too.